Right, good morning everybody. This is the gentleman about whom I'm going to talk this morning. General Edwin Addison Walker, as I say, a proud soldier but somewhat bitter politician. He was a great patriot because he used to fly 4 flags in his front garden. You can see just about me, this is certainly 2. Those 2 are the Stars and Stripes. And when he believed that the USA was under attack, he'd fly those upside down, which you can actually see upside down there. The flags at the back are the Texas flag and the Confederate flag, obviously, up there. So, I'm going to talk about the military history, or a bit about his military history, then about his politics, and then how he got involved with the right wing. And I'm sure you all know that he was a bit of a naughty boy. So, military background. He attended US Military Academy and graduated. He was actually an expert marksman with a rifle, but I'm sure that has nothing to do with the case. He fought valiantly in World War II and the Korean War, and he was decorated with several military awards. He had the Silver Star Medal, he had the Legion of Merit, and the Bronze Star Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, and he was honoured by the British, the French, and Norwegians and South Koreans, because during World War II he played a big role in several areas of the world, as we'll see. He commanded the 3rd Regiment in the US and Italy. He began the combat in Italy in about 1943, and he battled up through the Winter Line, which I'll show you a slide on that in a minute. He was redeployed to Anzio. He moved into Italy in Anzio and would have taken part in the Battle of Monte Cassino. Well, as you know, that was a terrible battle. I think tens of thousands were lost on either side fighting for that monastery. He took part in the fight for Rome and the invasion of Provence. Infantry, 417th Infantry Regiment. He was attached to the 3rd Army. He then went to Oslo, of all places. It is said that he had something to do with the taking of the Nazi heavy water facility there. I couldn't find any evidence. I think he was there to help drive out the part of the troops who were going to drive out the Germans. But he probably wasn't far. That was actually bombed, and I think it was local patriots who actually blew the place up and destroyed the heavy water. He was in Korea. He became a senior advisor to the Republic of Korea, and this is the whole of the Second World War and the Korean War. I think it made him think about how troops had been trained, the fact that they didn't have enough comprehension of what they were fighting for. That they were fighting for America and the West, and he didn't think that they had enough background in their knowledge. He then appointed military advisor to Chiang Kai-shek down in Formosa, and finally, after the Korean War, he was appointed commander of the Arkansas Military District. Korea, I got nothing to show that he actually went to Formosa, or Taiwan as it is now, but somehow he helped Chiang Kai-shek anyway. This is the Winter Line. It's 6 or 7 lines that the Germans set up to prevent the Allies moving up Italy. They were very well defended. Losses were very, very heavy. Colonel Walker had come up from the south, but he was removed and sent into Anzio, which is, and he would have moved to Monte Cassino. But each of these lines, which they were very heavily defended, they had machine gun posts and tank traps and heavy loss of life. In fact, my father-in-law told me about the time when he was coming up through Italy, he was actually strafed by a Messerschmitt 109. So they even had air colour then. So after the fighting disillusionment, Truman had removed Generals Anderson and MacArthur from Korea, which really upset him. He started attending meetings held by various anti-communist groups. He hated the fact that these soldiers of his, some of whom had been taken prisoner by the Chinese, had undergone brainwashing. He became critical of the Korean War stalemate, and no win war, it became the Forgotten War. And he didn't believe that there was sufficient policy in the Pacific. He didn't realize, he couldn't perceive how America was going to continue after the war in those areas. The war is not over, it can never be won as long as subversion exists in America. Here he's talking about communism, there's no doubt about it. Communism all the way through was his one point of he wanted to wipe out completely. But he did take command of the Arkansas Military District under Eisenhower's orders. So Little Rock, that is a place in Arkansas. The Little Rock Nine, a group of 9 students, black students, who wanted to get into the college in Little Rock, but in those days things were very difficult. They'd enrolled at the high school, and the attendance was a test of the 1954 Supreme Court ruling, which said that there must be desegregation within the schools. And this was one of the first tests in Arkansas. So on the 4th of September, the first day of classes, their entrance was blocked by the National Guard and protesters. One thing about the National Guard before I go on, I hadn't realised it, the National Guard is responsible to the governor of the state. Each state has a National Guard. So they're responsible through a chain of command to the governor. But in times of crisis, the president can federalise those troops, and so they then become responsible to the president. And this is one thing that Walker hated. He and both Kennedy and Eisenhower had done this in his time there. The illegal act was ordered by none other than the Arkansas governor, Orville Faubus, using the National Guard. And here are the poor students trying to come in. You can see there's a load of vitriolic abuse being hurled at them. This is the National Guard lining up and blocking their entrance into the school. Now Faubus was a bit of a turncoat actually, because he wanted to block these students coming in, but he had actually, as election as governor, he'd appointed 6 African American men to the Democratic State Committee, a move that triggered a charge during his '56 re-election campaign that he was too liberal on issues concerning race. So the following year, after the entire Arkansas legislature signed the Southern Manifesto, which attacked the US Supreme Court's decision, he decided that he'd better be on the other side, so he determined that his political survival depended on stopping desegregation, and this of course is what he was trying to do. So the situation festered and word got back to Washington, so the general is called for, and he comes down with 327th Airborne Battle Group. He swings into action, and Eisenhower now federalizes the Arkansas National Guard. So Walker is now in charge not only of his group of Airborne Battle Group, but all the National Guard as well. So there were 12,000 troops now down in Little Rock. Faubus goes on TV and he holds up his hand in her. We are now in occupied territory. In the name of God, what is happening in America? Well, in fact, all that was happening is they were trying to actually enforce the law, yes. So here we have the general, who's come down with a Colonel William Kuhn.
That's quite a mustache.
It is, isn't it? It really is superb, yes. Yeah. It's very good. I didn't have time to play it, but there's a picture of him getting into his car and being saluted, and the general standing nearby and watching him drive off. And anyway, it all came, and this is where this time that the Little Rock Nine are led into their school. Down the bottom there was I forgot to say, was the Faubus with his message saying support segregation of schools, but he was soon asked to take that down. So torn between duty and conscience, he actually said after Little Rock, we are all subject to all the laws, whether we approve them personally or not, and we have an obligation in conscience to obey them. There can be not exceptions, and if it were not otherwise, we could not be a strong nation, but a mere unruly mob. So he obeyed orders, and this was his command, of course. But soon afterwards, Walker stated that he completely disagreed with his orders given to him at Little Rock. He did not believe that Eisenhower should have federalised the National Guard. His views was that in recent years, special interest groups had prevailed upon civilian leaders to employ military forces on non-military adventures. I've put here, he started to believe that the military was being ordered to get involved with political machinations which should be sorted through social structures and the federal civil service. He also felt that undue left-leaning politicians were gaining too much power, both in the government and the judiciary, and he believed that the distribution of power was becoming too federal. So, he's now known as a Southern racist, and he felt that the communists were behind all the racial troubles, so he opposed everything that had gone on at Little Rock. He was provoked by federal incursion, provocation by federal incursion at Little Rock. The Arkansas legislature convened hearings on alleged communist subversion behind racial troubles in Arkansas. And who should testify and agree that communism was behind this racial unrest but Guy Bannister, which isn't surprising really. So he now meets Guy Bannister. Walker's staunch conservative political opinions led him to being criticised by Eisenhower for promoting political views while in uniform. Walker had even invited other national leaders of the far right to come and lecture his troops, which just wasn't the ticket at all. So on the 4th of August, Walker submitted his resignation as commander of the Arkansas Military District, claiming the US government had been infiltrated by an international communist conspiracy.
Of course, that explains it.
President Eisenhower refused to accept his resignation and gave Walker a new command of the 24th Infantry Division in Germany. I've looked into this quite a bit and looked up some of the websites of the troops who used to be there. There's a few comments about Walker which are quite interesting. But they looked at him. Anyway, he was based in Augsburg in Germany, also in Heidelberg, and a place called Fulda. And I'll come on to that in a minute more. At this point in time, Walker joins the John Burke Society, which I'm sure you've all heard of, but it's a strongly right-wing group with an extreme hatred of communism. And he'd said at the time that he resigned, in my opinion, the fifth column conspiracy and influence in the United States minimise or nullify the effectiveness of my ideals and principles, military mission and objectives, and the necessary American public spirit to support sons and soldiers. I have no further desire for military service at this time with this conspiracy and its influences on the home front. But he still took up his post in Germany. That is Augsburg Kaserne in Germany. This is a place that I know very well in Hessen. It is called Hanau, near Erlensee, which is my twin town where I live with Germany. That is the Kaserne airfield at Hanau. And this is a visit, actually, you can just see John Kennedy down there. He visited that in June '63. What can I say about that? Yes, these guys here, I've actually met, not those individual ones, but soldiers from there. I was invited to go on to the Kaserne in Hanau. They had helicopters deployed there back in 2000. This was obviously the Iron Curtain had come down and things were running down, but they were still defending our resources in Europe. This was just a little bit more about Hanau. John Kennedy came to that in June '63, which is PT-109 cake that they made for him when he came to the place. The Fulda Gap. I know quite a bit about this place. The Fulda Gap here, beautiful. It's a gap between two sets of mountains. The first guy to use it in history was Napoleon Bonaparte. He lost the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, and he wanted to get back to France to sort of re-muster his troops. So he started marching down this gap in the mountains. Got to Hanau and met up with Austrian and Bavarian troops, and he beat them, surprisingly. I mean, he didn't expect to, and he was able to go to Frankfurt and go back into Germany, into France, sorry. But now we have a situation where the Allies, of course, this is East Germany, and the Soviets had tanks all up here, and they were fearful, the Allies were fearful of an invasion from the USSR. So here's old Walker, stationed at Fulda. I also have run the Fulda Marathon, I can say, and that was fantastic because we ran it with the troops in Fulda. So we invited two of us, got together with two of the American troops. It was phenomenal. It was so, to think of it now, you know, we pulled each other along, and they were bloody fit guys, but it was fantastic, I tell you, to have met those guys.
Did you manage to keep up, Stuart?
Yes. So the Pro-Blue program, this is where he's trying to get at his troops again. This is because the Free Nations were depicted in the world map in red and blue, and the rest were in the communist countries were in red. He gained a reputation as a strict commander. In October, he established an anti-communist indoctrination program for his troops. And the program was endorsed by General Lyman Lemnitzer. You always remember him at Northwoods, of course, and fake flag programs. A German newspaper accused him of brainwashing soldiers with right-wing material. The paper reported that Walker had given a speech before his parent-teachers. He stated that President Truman, former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, and the Secretary of State Dean Acheson were definitely pink. In fact, he implied that they were just a shade or so less than outright red communists. He implied that 60% of the American media was communist-controlled. If you look at the data on this, William Cronkite, my God, he gets it. I'm not quite sure why, but he gets a real tongue lashing from him. He encouraged his men to read literature published by the John Burke Society. Secretary of State Robert McNamara relieved Walker his command, pending a 4-week investigation, because he violated the 1939 Hatch Act, which prohibited from talking to his employees and trying to bribe them politically. Various supporters pleaded on his behalf, but JFK reassigned him to Hawaii, I like this one, to become Assistant Chief of Staff on Training Operations in the Pacific region, and he thought he isn't going to do that. That is completely below his dignity. So now, in November 61, he resigns from the army, and President Kennedy accepted his resignation, making Walker the only US general to resign in the 20th century. He lost his pension because of this, but in fact he got it back later on through the courts. This is some of the literature he used to use. This is the one he wrote himself. He used to spread these among his troops, trying to make them vote the way he wanted them to. So he enters politics. It will be my purpose now as a civilian to attempt to do what I have found it no longer possible to do in uniform. My God, he doesn't know how to do things as well. He decided to run for election to become the governor of Texas. He was supported financially and politically by H.L. Hunt, who also coached him on how to deal with the press. Assaulted journalists who asked him to comment about praise heaped on him by the leader of the American Nazi Party. He was a bit of a fighter, this guy. There's another example in Dallas where he was attending a talk. I can't remember the guy he was talking, but quite a senior official. And Walker was sitting with some ladies at a table and with cups and saucers. A guy comes up from his side with a camera and tried to take a picture from his side. Walker gets up, grabs hold of him, pushes him against the wall, smashes into him, there's blood everywhere, teacups and saucers have gone everywhere. This bloke's still trying to talk, and the ladies give him a round of applause. And all he does is to get up and turns up to the stage where he's playing. I'm sorry about that, he said. So he was a bit of a vicious bugger. He finished last in the primary 6 candidates in the Democratic. He was lost to Lyndon's boy, as the press would call John Connolly. He's becoming noticed by the media. He becomes a prominent figure in the Citizens' Council. This was a shower, they really were. We'll talk a little bit about them in a minute. Their fanatical war to preserve segregation. He was welcomed back to Dallas by Mayor Earl Cabell on the National Indignation Convention, which had strong CIA connections. He joined the Minutemen. Guy McBannister was senior member, as was H.L. Hunt and David Ferry. So we're now getting together with these other right-wing fanatics. He organised violent protests against Adlai Stevenson when he came to Dallas. He actually booked the hall that Adlai Stevenson was going to talk in the night before, pulls all his comrades in, and what does he say? I've got it written down here. No, I won't.
Was that the one where he got hit on the head by a placard?
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, it was. So the following night, Adlai Stevenson, he said these guys should come along, stand on chairs, shout and scream, make a general nuisance of themselves, and commit violent acts if necessary. And you're quite right. This lady comes and whops Adlai Stevenson on the head. She's later asked why she did it. She said, "I was pushed by a Negro." Anyway, this is him going for, well, that's not when he was going for president, by the way, that was when he was going for the governorship. And this is him receiving the, what do they call it, National Indignation Convention, the honorary Stetson. Well, of course, we know who else had an honorary Stetson later on, but never had a chance to wear it. Walker's Rightwing Pals, so we had quite a few so-and-sos around. My goodness me, you've probably seen a lot of them. Some of them you may not have heard of. Guy Bannister, Lieutenant General Valet, Dan Smoot, and this guy, Leander Perez. Just a few. Dallas was packed with these guys. Reading Caulfield's book, I was flabbergasted. There must be at least 3 times the number of people up on that board that Walker was involved with. It is staggering what was actually going on in Dallas at the time. A little bit about these guys. As we've seen, H.L. Hunt was the guy who provided the overall impetus and the money to many of the right-wing groups. He was the 2nd richest man in the USA at the time. He believed, he was a very clever guy, and one of the things, this is a strange one, but it's apparently true, he was breastfed until he was 7 years old. And he believes that that had a lot to do with the fact that he was extremely clever mathematically and so on. Sounds a bit strange to me. Robert Surrey and Larry Schmidt had been in the army with Walker and virtually worshipped the ground he walked on. They became planners and doers in several right-wing organisations. We know what Guy Bannister was up to down in New Orleans with the anti-Castro Cubans, and Lee Harvey Oswald, of course. He was a friend of General Walker and Joseph Miltier and Dan Smoot. Billy James Hargis, we'll talk about him in a minute, was a right-wing Christian preacher who, as we shall see, joined up with Walker in proselytising the right-wing masses. Joseph Miltier was a violence-prone racist agitator who visited Walker on several occasions. Willie Somerset was working as an informant in the segregationist National States' Rights Party in '63 and was an FBI informant, I'm sure you all know that, where he secretly taped Miltier, the leader of the party, predicting that JFK was shooting virtually as it occurred, high-powered rifle, tall building, Patsy arrested later on, and so on. Willie Somerset also revealed that Lieutenant General Pedro Del Valle and General Walker were military advisors to the assassination plots of the Congress of Freedom and the Council of Statehood. These organisations were quite prepared to take out senior politicians and businessmen. I've got a few more notes about these guys, but it's all about anti-communism, segregation and so on. Just some of the groups. This was, reading this book, I could not hope to put them all down. These are the groups who operated in Dallas and Texas, all anti-communist, anti-pro-segregation, and General Walker was a member of the John Burke Society. The Minutemen, they were a vicious crowd. They would use rifles and so on. And he supported the Congress of Freedom and the Council of Statehood, so he was involved with the ones in green. And he was also involved with the rest of those in some form through the other characters.
Just a quick question. The Liberty Lobby, do you know if they published the Spotlight?
I don't know that.
Because that would have been involved the Howard Hunt
Yes.
suit, you know, if
Yes.
it's the same group.
Yes, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Yeah. What were they all up to? Several soldiers resigned along when General Walker did and joined him in Dallas. Bob Schmidt became General Walker's aide-de-camp. Mary Schmidt, full-time job on the National Indignation Committee. Robert Allen Surrey joined the General to spearhead his campaign to become the Governor of Texas. He was giving speeches across the whole of the South now. Surrey offered to publish Walker's speeches, and they formed a partnership known as the American Eagle Publishing Company. Surrey helped Walker and Billy James Vargas to plan Operation Midnight Ride, which I will mention in a couple of minutes. Larry Schmidt helped plan the vicious demonstration against Adlai Stevenson that I spoke about earlier. He was said to have patented himself after Joseph Goebbels. Walker played bridge on a regular basis with partners including Robert Surrey and FBI agent James Hosty. Walker and Surrey became even more radical and was said to have worked with Cuban raiders like Jerry Patrick Henning, Frank Sturgis, as well as Guy Bannister, David Ferry, and you name them. Paul was going through some of those also earlier on. That's Robert Surrey, that's Jerry Patrick Henning, David Ferry. Violence had told Miss. I'm going to read you this, I'm sorry, but I've read a lot, I know, but this is, I had to praise it. I was appalled about what was happening in Ole Miss, I really was. Let me just, it'll take about 4 minutes. State officials had blocked a guy called Joseph Meredith attempting to register for nearly 2 years at the university. And Governor Ross Barnett had also personally blocked his entry into the university on 2 occasions. Barnett tried to do various deals with John Kennedy on the subject, but the president was adamant that Meredith was to be enrolled. In September '62, tension was building in the area, and Walker was making plans back in Dallas. The enrollment of James Meredith would be stopped at all cost. He had a pledge from 100 Minutemen fighters to go to Oxford to resist federal troops, fully armed if necessary. On September the 26th, Walker broadcast a message on several radio stations inciting thousands to come from every state in the Union to stand beside Ross Barnett and rally to the cause of freedom. On the same day, Robert Kennedy warned Walker that he would be held in contempt of court if he interfered with the integration at Ole Miss. Ross Barnett rang Robert Kennedy and tried to get him to stop the enrollment, but Barnett was warned that he could be arrested, but he vowed to go to jail rather than desegregate. Walker was now in contact with the National States Rights Party through Joseph Miltier. They were ready to issue a call to their thousands of members to rendezvous in Jackson. Let's show the whole world how far the white man will go to stay white. Several hundred Klansmen were also on standby along with students awaiting Barnett's call to protect the sovereign state of Mississippi. On September the 29th, Walker landed by private plane in Jackson and held a press conference on the tarmac. He issued a televised statement calling for a national protest against the conspiracy from within. On the 30th of September, James Meredith and dozens of US Marshals arrived on campus. Meredith had planned to register the following day. Shortly before 7 p.m, he was escorted by 24 federal marshals to his guarded dormitory. 2,000 students tried to block their path. 538 federal law enforcement officers arrived on campus. Local sympathisers guarded the governor's mansion overnight to prevent his arrest by federal authorities. Both Robert and John Kennedy were closely monitoring the situation. Walker arrived shortly afterwards and issued a statement: "As the forces of the new frontier assemble to the north, let history be the witness to the courage and determination that calls us to Oxford to support a courageous governor. His lawful stand for state sovereignty is supported by thousands of people beyond the state's borders, now on the way to join you at Oxford." And so the riot began, start of what was to become an horrendous night. Newsmen were attacked and their equipment destroyed. Bottles, bricks and rocks were indiscriminately hurled. A bulldozer was set alight along with some old trucks and driven directly at the door of the university, behind which the sheltering Meredith must have been petrified. Walker joined the fray soon afterwards. Several students asked if he would lead them, and he duly did. He re-energised the rioters, who led repeated charges on the marshals. He told them to keep rioting all night. The situation resulted in absolute carnage. Walker returned to his hotel for a few hours' sleep, then re-emerged into the fray again, encouraging the rioters. Meanwhile, at midnight, Barnett gave a radio address and pledged never to yield the fight he was engaged in. One army officer recalls, "Walker walked right through our line. The crowd cheered him like a baseball hero after the home run that won the game, patting him on the back. They followed him out of the square like the Pied Piper. When an army officer asked Walker to move from the area, he refused, at which point several soldiers with fixed rifles surrounded him and pointed their bayonets inches from him." So this is the riot that was actually going on all night and went on for something like 12 hours. This is Governor Barnett. He chose to try and prevent this desegregation. This was the bulldozers and the trucks. These were the sort of trucks apparently that they set alight and hurled at the university. And this is the aftermath with the general, who is now actually about to be arrested. And inside we see Meredith sitting at his desk, lone man. He was escorted there as the general was arrested. And what happened? Well, this was the results of it. Photos come which rather tribute as to what was happening that night. It sounded absolutely awful with the arrests being made there. The aftermath: when the smoke and tear gas cleared, a French journalist and a local jukebox repairman lay dead. Both had been shot in the head, assassination style, with a Smith & Wesson .38 less than 12-inch range. God knows what somebody did that for. 22 deputy US marshals had been shot and 166 other marshals injured. Dozens of students were wounded by exploding tear gas canisters, bricks and rocks. General Walker was arrested on 4 federal charges, including seditious conspiracy, inciting, assisting and engaging in an insurrection against the authority of the United States. He was also indicted for assaulting a federal officer. Other arrests were made, but documentation, which apparently has been sought, any names have been redacted from those documents. Walker was sent to a US Medical Center in Springfield by Robert Kennedy. One report says he was stripped naked and put in the straitjacket just to belittle him. A 90-day psychiatric examination was ordered by Robert Kennedy, but unfortunately, well, perhaps for Walker it was fortunate, a lot of people jumped to his aid. 3 carloads of Minutemen drove to Springfield to picket on behalf of the general. They'd have been armed with rifles and probably automatic weapons as well. Walker declared that he was a political prisoner and gave the doctors only his name, rank and serial number. The Attorney General's decision, though, was challenged by this guy, Thomas Zatz, who insisted that psychiatry must never become used for political rivalry, which they saw it as. So Walker spent only 5 days in Springfield, returned to Dallas, where he was greeted by 200 of his admirers. An all-white federal grand jury in Oxford failed to indict Walker, and the US attorney asked that the charges be dismissed, and they duly were. However, the Justice Department later determined that General Walker, Ross Barnett, key advisors in the Citizens' Council, close associates of Guy Bannister, and the head of the state police had all conspired in advance to bring about the insurrection at Ole Miss. It was a well-planned, premeditated conspiracy, in their words. A bit about James Meredith. He actually was 29 when he tried to enroll. He'd graduated from Gibbs High School, served in the US Air Force for 9 years. He attempted to enroll at the university in 1961, but his admission was later withdrawn. All public educational institutions were ordered to desegregated, as I say. He filed a suit with the state court, alleging discrimination. The court ruled against him, but the Supreme Court ruled in his favour. James graduated from the university on the 18th of August 63. He was only there for a year actually, but he did graduate. He set out to undertake this march against fear. It was going to be a long march between Memphis and Jackson, 220 miles. On the second day he gets shot, not dreadfully, but it took him out of the war. While he was hors de combat, Martin Luther King took his place until he could join the march again. He became a stockbroker and went to law school and stood unsuccessfully in 72 as a Republican candidate for the House of Representatives. And this is him sort of remembering what happened on this day when he undertook this march. He's still alive today actually, he's 90. Walker and the anti-Castro Cubans, CIA calls on General, he's now a free agent, and the CIA actually asked him to go down to New Orleans. I hadn't realised this. His task was to help train the anti-Castro Cubans. He was heavily involved with smuggling guns to them. They reckoned he could probably procure them better than most people, being ex-military. Who does he hook up with but David Ferry and Guy Madison? Some of his men from this time in the army in Germany now become his henchmen. They formed a group called the Conservative USA. These are the guys which were with him in Germany. They were nasty pieces of work. Walker takes under his wing the virulent section of anti-Castro Cubans after 66. If you remember some of those names, this guy, of course, may well have had the plans, if you remember, on the system of the underground system in Dealey Plaza. Was found in his office. William Bishop, CIA assassin, worked with Cuban exile groups, Felipe Vidal Santiago, and two others, at which time JFK Assassination was discussed. So he was getting together and talking to a lot of other right-wing people and talking about the assassination. Bishop admits to meeting on several occasions with Walker and Willoughby in Dallas. Abraham Bolden refers to the SS rumours that Cuban dissidents and right-wing Southerners were plotting to kill JFK. If you remember, Abraham Bolden was the black from Secret Service who was employed by Kennedy. Walker visits H.R. Hunt's office on several occasions just before the assassination. Alpha 66 involved in an aborted attempt in Chicago to kill Kennedy, 4 men with rifles. Did Walker know about that? He may well have done. Walker begins to attend these meetings, also attended by Lee Harvey Oswald. Jack Ruby is seen at Walker's house on several occasions just before the assassination. And so he was also become the head of the Dallas American Nazi Party. These buggers, they used to dress up in uniforms and they would say Sieg Heil. They had all the regalia, and they even had a place where they met. What did they call it? It was near Arlington where they had the headquarters, and it was just like a bunker where the SS used to meet.
Was it Hardendale?
I think it was.
Hardendale?
Yes, that's it. Yes. Operation Midnight Ride. This is where he fancies himself as Paul Revere. Remember, Paul was the guy who rode the horse through midnight, through the night, to warn the Americans of the coming of the British troops during the War for Independence. So General Walker thought he was riding through the days trying to force back the red communism rather than the red uniforms of the British Army. 6-week, 29 stop tour, tour included 27 cities in 17 states. He intended to alert the American public to the enemy within and without, and these what they were mainly concerned about. And their talks would sometimes, they'd have 5,000 people meeting up with him in all these different towns and so on that they visited. The real reason for the tour, besides raising money, was to muster hardcore underground and militant citizens. The FBI investigated allegations that Walker had been raising an army for insurrection. He was considered a very important person within the militant far-right group. He said that the rallies bring together people who are united in what they are angry about. They are united in what they are against, which is, and that's Hargis and Walker. This is at the school in Denver. Just happens to be one of the places that they attended. Then Walker was tied up with these two infamous leaflets. I'm sure you remember them, you can read some of those. This was a list of questions as to what he was doing about preventing the spread of communism and so on in America. It's a full-page Dallas Morning News advert, this one. It was placed by Bernard Wiseman. It cost $1,465 and paid for by Nelson Piper Hunt, who was H.L. Hunt's son, written by Schmidt and Robert Surrey, but this one, they were both Walker inspired, so he had a hand in both those leaflets. This came about from a meeting between Miltier and Somerset after the assassination. They met up apparently when Miltier was boasting that what he told Somerset before the assassination had come true. And at the same time, he actually said to Somerset about Tippett, that he believed that Tippett was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, which apparently 75% of the whole DPD were members of the Ku Klux Klan at the time, and that the two of them, Walker and Tippett, used to meet at the Austin's barbecue, and meetings on the JBS and the John Burke Society, but at the same time he was Ku Klux Klan, which, as you see, this is phenomenal. The name of several historical and current American white supremacist far-right organizations and hate groups. Their primary targets are African Americans, Hispanics, Jews, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and Catholics, as well as immigrants, leftists, homosexuals, Muslims, atheists, and abortion providers. Who's left in the country? But anyway, it is said that Edwin Walker and J.D. Tippett were members of the National States Rights Party. In Dallas, New Orleans, we have Bannister, Ferry, Carl Springer, Delphine Roberts, and that they all used to meet up together. So he states that Miltier stated that Tippett was on the roof of one of the buildings at the time of the shooting, but you can't see the evidence for that. But that's what he told Somerset anyway. The exact time of the assassination, General Walker was on a commercial flight from Shreveport in New Orleans back to Dallas. As the pilot announced that Kennedy had been murdered, Walker leapt from his seat. He ran up and down the aisle of the plane several times, exclaiming, "See, it couldn't have been me. I'm here on this plane." And he even got the air hostess to sign his boarding pass before he left the plane to prove that he'd been on it. So I think he was obviously after, desperate for some sort of alibi. This is quite interesting. This is his deposition to Wesley Libra. And I think Wesley Libra does a bloody good job. He tries his darndest to get information from him. Libra, are you familiar with the organisation known as the Minutemen? In general terms, are you a member of that organisation? I am not. Do you know of any connection between the Minutemen and the assassination of President Kennedy? I do not. Do you know of any conspiracy or connection on the part of the so-called right-wing organisation and the assassination of President Kennedy? I do not. Do you know of any connection between any of the associated themselves with and who, shall we say, follow you as a political leader and the assassination of President Kennedy? No, people that follow me are for constitutional government. This is absolutely in violation of constitutional government, very destructive to what we stand for. So you say that there is not involvement in any kind or nature, whatever, between any of the organisations or people that associate with you or are involved with you in the assassination of President Kennedy? I certainly know of none, and I certainly wouldn't be suspicious. I would be suspicious from the centre to the left. In any event, you don't have any knowledge of or any information that would suggest to you any such conspiracy or involvement of any right-wing organisation or person. Is that correct? That is correct. And he went on like this, refusing to answer the questions, and actually went on to be asked about Willoughby and Oswald, and just shut down completely if you read it. Just before the end of the protracted session, the General decides to shaft a mate. And who was this? But this guy, George de Warrenshire. So Libra asked him, do you have any information that you think the Commission ought to have that we haven't already talked about? Yes, I think the Commission should look into George de Warrenshire, but it hasn't. What do you know about Mr. de Warrenshire? I know that in my information indicates that he lived next door to that professor that was supposed to have burned up. I looked into this because I've read the book Dr. Mary's Monkey by Haslam. She, well, I've got the dates here. She was killed on the yes. I'm saying this was certainly a comment made by Walker about the murder of Mary Sherman. He was deposed by the Warren Commission on July the 23rd, 64, and she was murdered on July the 21st. Mary Sherman was an American orthopedic surgeon and cancer researcher who worked at the Ochsner Foundation Hospital in New Orleans. You may have read the book Dr. Mary's Monkey by Edward Haslam. Mary was murdered and her body was very badly burned, possibly by some form of radiation. The coroner classified Sherman's death as a homicide, citing lethal stab wounds and severe burns to her upper torso and right arm. Her murder remains unsolved. This ties up with Judith Mary Baker as well, because she was wrote about this, if you believe what Judith was saying as well. So Lee Harvey Oswald was also tied up with this cancer research. Do you have any information that would connect de Warrenshire to the assassination? I wondered whether he was perhaps pointing the finger at de Warrenshire as having murdered Mary Sherman, but I can't quite see why he made this remark. I have the information the paper had that connected him with the Oswalds. Yes, of course, it is common knowledge that de Warrenshire was associated with Oswald now. Other than that, do you have any information to indicate de Warrenshire was involved in any way with the assassination of President Kennedy? Not directly. Do you have any indirect evidence? This is Watts steps in. General Watts was supporting him legally, so he actually cuts in. Do you have any indirect evidence? And so Walker completely ignores the question and moves on. He says, I'm tired of them blaming the right wing, and I have had enough of this, and it's about time that the Commission cleared the city of Dallas. But Libra actually goes back and says, well, do you have any indirect indication that would associate de Warrenshire with the assassination? So he's actually repeating what Clyde Watson said, and of course we get no answer. I think it is very important that de Warrenshire knew Oswald. I think it is very interesting. My information is that de Warrenshire went to Haiti. I have nothing further to add, and the whole lot was just shut down then. Just one more. How are we going?
We're doing well on time.
Good. Jack Ruby, I'm sure you remember these words. There was an organisation here, this is when he was being deposed in prison, and Chief Justice Warren was there. There is an organisation here, Chief Justice Warren, if it takes my life at this moment to say it, and Bill Decker said, be a man and say it. There is a John Birch Society right now in activity, and Edward Walker is one of the top men of the organisation. Take it for what it is worth, Chief Justice Warren. Unfortunately for me giving the people the opportunity to get in power because of the act I committed has put a lot of people in jeopardy with their lives. Don't register with you, does it? And Chief Justice Warren says, no, I don't understand that. And of course they did absolutely nothing to try and understand what his concerns were. But he's I think we know that Ruby knew Walker pretty well, and was really trying to say, you know, maybe the right wing had been involved in this in some way, but he was pretty concerned about his own life if he spoke too much about it. So were these zealots involved in the assassination, and was Walker as an individual? There's no smoking gun, but they definitely had foreknowledge. The Army generals Edwin Walker, Charles Willoughby, and Pedro del Valle hated Kennedy for his failure to support the Bay of Pigs assault and for failing to invade Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Desegregation was seen in Texas as ruinous to society. Most right-wing parties believed that many of JFK's political actions were treasonous. There was a hatred of all that his government stood for. Oilman H.L. Hunt and Clint Murchison discussed the planned changes to the oil depletion allowance. I hadn't sort of realised, of course, that these guys were stood to lose a lot of money because of this change in the taxation system, but they're also heavily involved with the right wing. I tended to sort of separate the right wing from the from people like the mafia, from people like the oil men, and they were working independently, or may have worked independently, but they were, I think they were all working together, and certainly funding was coming from many sources within the right wing areas. FBI uncovered a plot where the Council for Statehood had set Generals Edwin Walker, Pedro de Fong and Clyde Watts as part of the military underground that would lead the takeover of the US government. Industrial and military complex was populated by the right wing, so stood to lose huge sums of money over Vietnam. Walker himself hated both RFK and JFK for his muzzling in the army and the way he was treated after Ole Miss. Walker's association with anti-Castro Cubans and people like Guy Bannister and H.L. Hunt. Walker's response on the aircraft when JFK's assassination was announced, highly suspicious, and as I say, was he looking for some sort of alibi in case he was, he must have known that it was going to happen, I'm sure he did. The concerns of Jack Ruby when he was deposed by the Warren Commission. And what was going on in New Orleans just before the assassination, a meeting with Leander Perez. This guy was reportedly put up a lot of the money. Down in New Orleans, he'd had a meeting with Walker. Walker had been to a bank afterwards and spent several hours. He then went to the Jung building and spent some time there. He was involved, I think it was Guy Bannister's people. It wasn't Guy Bannister, but his people were seen in this area when meetings were taking place at the bank and at the Jung, I think it was a hotel. And this was all just before the assassination. So I honestly believe that the right wing must have had they were major players, and I don't know, I think Walker was perhaps so upset by this time that he may well have had a hand in getting rid of JFK.
Great.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a comment and maybe a question. One of the persons that was highlighted for potential prior plot in San Antonio was a guy called Harry Power. Sorry, Tony. But Harry Power, I think. But and he had been investigated for allegedly trying to kill Walker.
Trying to kill him.
Trying to kill him.
What period was this?
This is, I don't know what, you know, when his attempt to kill Walker or alleged.
This wasn't the one that, I mean, I didn't speak about the Lee Harvey Oswald purported one, because that's all going to be done by Scott tomorrow. But was this to do with the shooting at Walker's home, or was this another assassination attempt?
It's very vague. The only thing we know is that he had been investigating for an attempt or a threat against Walker.
Right.
That's all we know.
That's all we know.
But that's an interesting.
Yeah.
Because then you bring up that Walker seems to have staged a communist kidnapping of him.
Yes.
Do you believe that he was part of the staging of the fake shot, or the attempt on his life?
Well, I haven't looked into the attempt on his life because it's going to be discussed tomorrow by Scott Reed. But I don't believe it was Oswald simply because there were apparently two people. They drove away. Oswald couldn't drive. It was only after the assassination that Marina came out and said that he'd done it. She was told to say it, I'm sure. It was all part of her being allowed to stay in the country, wasn't it, really? Anything she said after this, after her husband had been killed, it was the Secret Service, the CIA, telling her what to say, really. It wasn't until much later on that she opened up and perhaps told us more the truth.
And just one thing I'm happy to learn, I didn't know about his link with Alpha 66.
Yes.
Because Vessianus with Alpha 66 too,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then Tony Cuesta, and even the people that are thought to have visited Silviadio.
Yes.
So
They set that up.
that's a lot of links towards it.
And it is believed that they took part in the Chicago attempt, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, I didn't bring it down to, I would believe Alpha 66, and they got a warning from someone called Lee, right? But many people thought, because Lee Harvey Oswald, one of his missions was not only to spy on communists, but also to look into the pro-Castro, anti-Castro Cubans.
Right.
So he was keeping tabs on both.
Sides.
And that's, some people think that the anti-Castro Cubans knew he was a snitch, and say, oh, he's a perfect Nazi. But that's all very speculative.
Just a couple of points.
Yeah.
As luck would have it, you mentioned Adrian Bolton.
Yes.
His book is on that table.
Oh, is it?
If you're interested. Echo from Dealey Plaza. It's called. And J.D. Tippett was not named after Jefferson, but he was called J.D.
Yeah, his father said he was called J.D.
His father said that, and it was
Well, a lot of
in
people
the
say
Joseph
Jefferson.
McBride book.
Yes, you're
So,
right.
yeah.
Yes, Into the Nightmare.
Yeah. So I think he was always called J.D.
Yeah, he certainly was, but some people say it was after President Jefferson.
I think it's been proven that it wasn't. But
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got lunch.
Okay.
Dinner is 7:30.